Hey there, folks. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we've got something incredibly intriguing for you. A story about Hoyeol and his unexpected journey into the world of a virtual reality game. Now, let's get started. Once an ordinary salaryman named Hoyeol found himself in a most extraordinary situation. One day, he suddenly awoke in the body of a character he had created back in his middle school days, Grandfell Claudi Arpeus Romeo. Hoyeol, now in Claudi's body, stood in front of the bathroom mirror, bewildered by the transformation. Claudi Arpeus Romeo was a character with hair as white as snow and skin as light as porcelain. He wore a sleek, dark suit, a stark contrast to Hoyeol's more casual attire. Yet, to their astonishment, their faces were identical in every way: thick eyebrows, cat-like eyes, a high-bridged nose, and thin lips. The only noticeable difference was their hair, with Hoyeol's dark as charcoal. Both of them stared intensely at each other, each trying to comprehend this inexplicable situation. Hoyeol finally broke the silence, realizing that something was amiss. He knew that he was not talking to himself, but rather to the character he had created. While Hoyeol and Claudi maintained the same posture, cupping their faces with their hands, they responded to the question, "What's my name?" simultaneously. But their responses were different. It was clear that they were two distinct individuals coexisting in the same body. As Hoyeol pondered the situation at his table, he realized that the character Claudi Arpeus Romeo had evolved into a living, breathing persona. The character he had sketched in middle school had come to life, and this transformation had taken place a decade and a half later. In the dimly lit room, young Hoyeol, now Claudi Arpeus Romeo, was deeply engrossed in his sketchbook, illuminated by a small lamp. With a broad grin on his face, he drew his character onto a previously empty page. This character had a broad, confident smile and exuded an ENJ personality according to the MBTI system. As Hoyeol sipped his tea and pondered the extraordinary turn of events, he couldn't help but marvel at the fantastical nature of his own creation. He had breathed life into Claudi Arpeus Romeo, and now they shared a singular existence, an unusual fusion of creativity and reality. This mysterious scenario left Hoyeol, now cohabiting with his own character, with endless questions. As Hoyeol, now inhabiting the persona of Claudi Arpeus Romeo, contemplated the bizarre turn of events, he couldn't help but feel a sense of victory and accomplishment. He had created an extraordinary, priceless version of himself, and the wide smile on his lips reflected his delight. Hoyeol became even more convinced that Grandfell was, in fact, the fictional character he had crafted during his teenage years. It was the realization that this fantastic transformation was somehow linked to a virtual reality game, History of the Archana Continent, that changed the course of his understanding. The game had been unparalleled in its ability to transport players to another universe, and it had reached legendary status until its abrupt termination, along with the mysterious disappearance of the CEO, Raymond. After the termination of the game's service, the world began to experience the unexpected emergence of Archina within reality. Conflicts erupted as real-world monsters from the game materialized. Many believed that the end of the world was imminent. However, on the other side of the chaos, players who had once delved into the world of Archina found themselves imbued with the skills and abilities of the characters they had controlled in the game. These players became the world's last hope, the heroes destined to confront the monsters and save humanity. Hoyeol couldn't deny that he, too, had fantasized about being a player in Archina, wielding incredible powers and becoming a hero. However, the reality was harsh. The cost of obtaining a virtual reality login machine was exorbitant, in the tens of millions range, and even renting one came with a monthly fee in the hundreds of thousands range. With the financial troubles that had befallen his family due to his father's business failures, Hoyeol's dreams seemed unreachable. As he observed his family's turmoil, with his father burdened by guilt and his sister attempting to provide comfort, Hoyeol felt a deep sense of despair and sorrow. The decline in their financial situation had left him in a state of utter devastation. Hoyeol had always been a dedicated gamer. His love for virtual worlds and the immersive experiences they offered was something that had defined him for years. But, as he stared at his computer screen one fateful evening, he knew he had no choice but to give up playing Archina, the game that had consumed his life for as long as he could remember. Frustration gnawed at him as beads of sweat dripped down his face. Little did he know that this kind of moment would come, the moment when his past would come back to haunt him. Grandfell, a character he had created in his middle school days, had resurfaced in his life, and Hoyeol was ill-prepared for the consequences. Hoyeol's past decisions haunted him. He regretted quitting the game in his younger years when a series of events prevented him from playing for a whole year. His character's levels and statistics, which he had painstakingly built, were now utterly worthless. It was a chaotic mess to think that he'd have to respond as a character he had created 10 years ago. Finally, he had managed to awaken a long-forgotten ability, but he couldn't help but feel it was too little, too late. Grandfell was savoring his cup of tea, seemingly unperturbed, as Hoyeol's frustration reached its peak. In the midst of this turmoil, an opportunity presented itself. Hoyeol wanted to introduce his old character, Grandfell Claudi Arpeus Romeo, to the world. He couldn't help but cringe at the full name and the memories attached to it. It was a character he had created during the height of his puberty, one he had been heavily invested in. The events of Grandfell's backstory were tragic. He had been the heir to a powerful family, but a demon had ruthlessly slaughtered them, leaving him alone. In response, Grandfell had become a demon hunter, seeking revenge. Hoyeol couldn't help but remember how he used to find this story cringeworthy and completely meaningless in middle school. He had thought he was this character, and it was his dark past. Now, as a grown man, those memories were a source of endless embarrassment. Grandfell, however, saw things differently. A sly smile played at the corners of his lips as he closed his eyes, reminiscing. The moment of realization hit Hoyeol like a ton of bricks. Grandfell's way of speaking and thinking was not the same as his own. Embarrassment and frustration washed over him, and he tried to hide his face with his hands, feeling the blood rush to his cheeks. It seemed as if he were blushing, but in reality, the look of horror on his face was because he had just realized another problem. One day at work, he found himself standing in front of his supervisor, sipping a cup of coffee. The atmosphere was tense, but a glimmer of humor briefly lit the room when his employer made an odd comment about his hair. He couldn't help but find it strange, and the comment grated on him. The combination of frustration and irritation bubbled within him, and he impulsively poured his hot coffee onto his boss, causing shock and disbelief. Hoyeol, as he came to be known, instantly regretted his outburst. His boss's face drained of color, and he knew there would be consequences for his impulsive action. Lawsuits loomed on the horizon, and Hoyeol's future seemed grim. However, he was no ordinary man. Hoyeol, and others like him, had a unique perspective on life. They belonged to a group known as nobles who didn't bow down in the face of adversity. It was as if they were destined to face challenges head-on, no matter how daunting they may be. Hoyeol's speech had always been different from the norm, and he pondered what it might be like to become a player and immerse himself in a character's role. As he contemplated this, he couldn't help but wonder why most people who ventured into such roles didn't experience significant changes. With his job prospects dwindling, Hoyeol began considering alternative options. His memories of the virtual game Archina from a decade ago sparked his curiosity. He decided to seek out information about the game by opening his laptop and delving into online research. His findings revealed that high-level players in Archina were handsomely rewarded with substantial sums of money. But these riches came at a steep price, risking their lives in intense battles. Hoyeol realized that, for him, life itself was more precious than any material wealth. This revelation led him to seek out information about how demon hunters operated in this new era. However, as he embarked on his research, Hoyeol was surprised to find that there were only 2 pages of relevant information. It seemed that demon hunters were shrouded in mystery. Their actions and methods were rarely documented, leaving Hoyeol with more questions than answers. As he delved deeper into the information, he stumbled upon a shocking revelation. A headline on one of the pages sent a shiver down his spine. Action base falls to the darkness. The report stated that all the demon hunter NPCs in the town of Action were mercilessly killed. The Healer Federation Authority had identified 152 casualties, and there were no survivors. Hoyeol was horrified as he scrolled through images of demon hunters huddled together on the cold ground, surrounded by pools of blood. The scene resembled a gruesome slaughterhouse. It was evident that a bloodbath had taken place in Action Base, leaving him with a deep sense of dread and an ominous mystery to unravel. The scene that unfolded was utterly heartbreaking, as the once thriving bastion of hope and protection had crumbled to ruins. The information about the destruction was credible, coming from a reputable news outlet. However, it was difficult for Hoyeol to accept the grim reality. The very role of a demon hunter, a role that had been iconic for so long, seemed to have been erased from existence. Hoyle couldn't fathom the idea that not only had the number of demon hunters dwindled to almost nothing, but the role itself had become obsolete. This transformation occurred a decade ago when demon hunters had not only suffered from poor statistics and lackluster skills, but also faced the dilemma of choosing a viable build path. Leveling up for them was a daunting task, relying on experience accumulated through quests instead of the more straightforward monster hunting. In contrast, demon hunters were unparalleled when facing demons, a league apart from other classes. However, demons were primarily found in specific demon hunter quests, infamous for their grind-heavy nature. This led to a situation where playing as a demon hunter had lost its meaning, and the class itself was deemed pointless. As Hoyle pondered this dire revelation, he reached for his face, a sign of his deep contemplation. The situation appeared grim, particularly because all the skill-teaching NPCs, critical for character development, were now gone. Seeking more information, Hoyle scrolled down the news page and found something that left him astounded. A message from an entity explained that demon hunters were specialized to defeat new demons added to a recent update. This phrase caught Hoyle's attention, as it hinted at a significant development. Intrigued by this new piece of information, Hoyle continued his search. He clicked on a link titled History of Archina version 8.11, Reality Update Complete, Impossible to Bear. This was the key to unlocking the mysteries that lay ahead. As the screen loaded, Hoyle was on the brink of uncovering the truth about the recent upheaval in the world of demon hunters and the enigmatic new demons that had shaken their existence to the core. Demons had emerged as a formidable threat. Players, both new and seasoned, found themselves struggling to combat the demons' debuffs, mental disruptions, and even possession. The casualty rate had skyrocketed, leaving many wondering if reality itself had been invaded by these malevolent entities. Amidst the chaos, one thought gnawed at the mind of a dedicated demon hunter. What if he was the last of his kind? In the wake of the escalating demon crisis, he questioned whether he should take charge. Even though a decade had passed since the fall of the action, there was no guarantee that the demons he was familiar with were the same ones wreaking havoc now. A lot could change in 10 years. The perplexity of the situation weighed heavily on him. Even high-level players, those who were expected to be invincible, now found themselves struggling. The demon hunter's train of thought was abruptly cut off. But then, he remembered his own pride. Grandfell Hoyeol would not back down from mere demons. Regardless of the temptations or taunts they hurled at him, they would fail to hurt his indomitable pride. This realization stirred something deep within him, and he steeled himself for the challenge. After all, these were just pointless thoughts. There was no need to hesitate. Meanwhile, in the real world, a news reporter was delivering a live update on the demon crisis. Several casualties had been reported, and the situation remained dire. Grandfell Hoyeol knew he had a duty to fulfill, and he vowed to send the demons back to hell. In the aftermath of the Great Cataclysm, time passed, and while many things were lost, people managed to pick up the pieces of their lives. The streets once again teemed with life, and the inhabitants of this new world readjusted to their surroundings. But where there was light, there had to be darkness. The negative emotions of the people in this newly adjusted world became a source of sustenance for the demons. As the world seemed to stabilize, dark forces still lurked, biding their time. A young man with a wide grin on his face, the party leader and tanker, Nam Keelman, stood ready for the challenges that lay ahead. He was clad in full-plate armor and wielded a shield and a sword that hung loosely from his back. In addition to his weapons, he held what appeared to be a phone in his right hand. He scanned the horizon, his eyes widening as he awaited the arrival of a new threat. Grandfell, a tall and imposing figure, strolled down the bustling city streets in his signature black suit. His every step oozed an air of refined sophistication. As he made his way through the crowd, his sharp eyes locked on Nam Keelman, a young man who seemed to be eagerly awaiting his arrival. Nam Keelman wasted no time in extending a warm greeting to Grandfell. He was evidently the leader of the party and expressed how much of a pleasure it was to finally make Grandfell's acquaintance. Grandfell, however, responded with a nod and a murmured acknowledgement, maintaining an almost stoic expression. His gaze was distant, fixated on a peculiar sight that separated the world into a black dimension with hints of purple. This phenomenon was known as the rupture. Grandfell understood that this was how players in this strange world perceived it. For those living their lives normally, the rupture had no impact, but for people like Grandfell, who had awakened to a different reality, it was a pivotal element. He realized that if it weren't for his awakening, he would be oblivious to this extraordinary phenomenon. Nam Keelman continued with the introductions, sharing vital information about their current location. They were standing at the entrance of a place called Nolls underground storage, and the destruction progress of this location was 19.8%. Grandfell knew that this was a suitable hunting spot for someone at his level, 55. What amazed him more was Nam Keelman's revelation that the average level of the competitors who had entered this place was a staggering 200. This was a level of expertise that Grandfell could hardly fathom at the moment, and it emphasized the need for him to continue working hard and leveling up. The party consisted of various members. There was Han Song-wook, a close-range deal-taker, who was much like Grandfell in that he rarely broke his expression and spoke very little. Then there was Choi Jong-hoon, another close-range dealer, whose constant and infectious grin seemed to contrast with the seriousness of the others. Finally, there was a young woman and a magic dealer with an ever-present bright smile on her face, Seo Jong-yeon. As Nam Keelman began speaking about their mission and the progress rate, it became apparent that another party had already entered the underground storage. The group readied themselves, knowing that they too would venture into this enigmatic place in just 5 minutes. The group of individuals had gathered to discuss an impending threat. They all seemed to be in agreement, except for one member named Grandfell, who was preoccupied with thoughts of destructive progress that was at 19.8%. This destruction progress, when it reached 100%, would result in a rupture breaking down, releasing monsters into the real world. However, these players had a unique ability. They were allowed to raid these ruptures. Additionally, only players could approach a ticking time bomb, suggesting a significant responsibility. As they prepared for their mission, Keelman spoke up, capturing the attention of everyone at the party. They all turned to him, nodding in agreement. However, Grandfell remained distant, as still as a block of ice, his thoughts evidently elsewhere. In contrast, Hoyeol seemed friendly and outgoing, feeling the need to contribute as an only child who had grown up with 3 sisters. Hoyeol's sisters were apparently quite demanding, often asking him to engage in physical activities, even wrestling, when they were younger. Hoyeol's reminiscences led him to say, "You do not need to worry, for I am here." However, his tone seemed to have unintended consequences. While he intended to reassure, his words came across as kingly and condescending. His team members froze, and Grandfell, who had been ignored earlier, remained speechless. Trying to ease the tension, Keelman laughed off the situation and steered the conversation toward a different subject. They discussed the type of monster they were facing, specifically a Noll. As they moved away from this awkward moment, Hoyeol wished the ground would split and swallow him up. He vowed never to speak again, fearing his words would only bring disaster and shame. Amidst this turmoil, they received a notification that they had entered Nolls underground storage, a place in terrible disarray. The ceiling was damaged, the floors broken, and shattered windows allowed blood to splatter across the room. The group felt an eerie sense of foreboding, and it was Jong-yoon who finally broke the silence, expressing concern about the missing members in this once called Nolls place. Keelman's words triggered them to realize something important, setting the stage for a mysterious and dangerous adventure in this dark and foreboding world. They were well aware that another group had arrived before them, which suggested that these elusive Nolls had been met with resistance. The team of brave souls, led by a seasoned leader, approached the situation with cautious optimism. The leader reassured the group that if they followed the right path, they would be able to claim their fair share of Nolls. Among the team, Grandfell walked quietly at the back of the group, observing his surroundings with keen eyes. As they continued, a subtle unease settled upon him, as though the very air carried a sense of foreboding. Suddenly, the leader's voice broke the silence, shouting over to the team. He warned them that Nolls were only 70 meters away, and they needed to prepare for a battle. The team understood the signal, and Keelman, a swift and deadly fighter, took the initiative, leading the charge. The rest of the team swiftly followed suit. As the team engaged the Nolls, a peculiar observation began to trouble Grandfell. He noticed the roles within the team were somewhat unconventional. The supposed tanker, whose primary duty was to protect the team, was instead provoking the monsters. The dealers, typically responsible for dealing damage, were focused on defense, while the mage was doing most of the damage. Grandfell couldn't help but wonder if this was a new approach to combat tactics or simply a miscommunication. However, he had his own concerns. Grandfell felt useless in the heat of the battle, and so he stood frozen like a block of ice, watching the skirmish unfold with a detached fascination. Jong-hoon, one of the more experienced members, took this opportunity to mock Grandfell, making jokes at his expense. He accused Grandfell of being a newbie who couldn't keep up with the team's actions. Amidst the chaos, Grandfell decided to check his inventory. He discovered 3 items: a valuable yet weak silver dagger, a similarly precious silver arrow, and an adventurer's bow. None of these weapons were of any practical use to him in the ongoing battle. Just as Grandfell contemplated his next move and how to obtain a more suitable weapon, an arrow sliced through the air, heading directly for him. With a quick reflex and heightened alertness, Grandfell managed to sidestep the incoming attack, narrowly avoiding a potential catastrophe. The ambush had caught the entire team off guard, and panic spread like wildfire. One member, Songwook, grumbled about the overwhelming number of Nolls, feeling helpless in the face of this sudden onslaught. The team found themselves in a dire situation, with Grandfell still searching for a way to contribute and prove his worth in the heat of battle. As the chaos intensified, the team would need to regroup, adapt, and fight their way out of the ambush. In the midst of the chaotic battle, Grandfell urgently called for assistance from his comrade, Keelman. But when Keelman turned around to see Jong-hoon, he was met with a sight that filled him with disappointment and concern. Jong-hoon, another member of the group, stood before them in a state of extreme exhaustion and disarray. His face was a canvas of scratches, bruises, and open wounds, with blood flowing down his cheeks. Clearly, he had been through a grueling ordeal. Jong-hoon had been in the middle of telling Keelman to go back when she interrupted him with a grave warning. An enormous knoll was right behind him, its blade almost slicing his face. Had he delayed even a moment longer, his neck would have been separated from his body. He had narrowly escaped death. The knoll, propelled by an unseen force, was thrown across the room, confusion and relief etched across its grotesque face. An arrow protruded from its body, an arrow that had been unleashed by none other than Grandfell. From a distance, Grandfell stood in an odd posture, a large bow in hand, his expression unwavering. Grandfell couldn't help but furrow his brow as he observed the situation. It was evident that the monsters had not been properly trained or disciplined. He acknowledged that sometimes punishment was necessary, but he was not entirely pleased with the outcome. Jong-hoon, despite his dire condition, pretended to chuckle and praised Grandfell for his timely intervention. It was unclear why he had spoken in such a manner, but the acknowledgement of Grandfell's contribution was clear. As the battle raged on, numerous Nolls closed in on Seong-wook from all directions, intent on ending his life. Their eyes blazed with an intense, predatory flame, and they roared at him as though they intended to devour his entire body. Their sharp fangs glistened, ready to tear his flesh into pieces. Despite the fact that their very bodies were formidable weapons, the Nolls still wielded bows as if that were not enough to guarantee a kill. Silver armor plates covered their shoulders, hands, and legs, further enhancing their formidable appearance. Jong-yeon, a member of the group, shivered as she watched the terrifying scene unfold. She clutched her weapon and covered the rest of her body in fear, knowing that she had to protect herself from these deadly adversaries. The group was locked in a desperate struggle for survival, with each moment testing their skills, teamwork, and determination. Jong-yeon was gripped by fear, not knowing how to respond to the encroaching danger. However, Grandfell, the ever-watchful member of the group, offered her some much-needed guidance. He reminded her to stay calm and assured her that he would take care of the Nolls approaching them. He encouraged her to cast a strong defensive spell, even if it took some time. With a nod of agreement from Jong-yeon, she began the incantation process for the spell. Grandfell, meanwhile, put forth his best efforts to engage the Nolls in combat, trying to hold them off before they reached their position. After a brief period, Jong-yeon successfully completed the spell, and she announced its impending release, warning her comrades to prepare. "It's coming now, everyone watch out," she shouted with all the strength she could muster. The spell, named Fire Arrow, was activated. A massive pentagram materialized in front of her, and from within it, flaming arrows began to emerge. These fiery projectiles streaked toward the approaching Nolls. A deafening explosion echoed throughout the area as the fire arrows struck their targets. Jong-hoon tried to shield himself from the smoke that billowed from the impact, covering his nose with his hand. He turned to Jong-yeon, asking if it was over. She, still trying to catch her breath, placed her hands on her knees, beads of sweat forming on her face. The spell had clearly taken a toll on her. Despite his own fatigue, Grandfell reassured Jong-yeon that he was all right, urging her to focus on tending to the other team members. He knew she needed to look after them, and he had other concerns to address. Grandfell continued to examine the fallen Nolls, his face turning ashen. It was evident that the fire had engulfed their entire bodies, causing them excruciating pain. The growls and writhing of the Nolls indicated the agony they were enduring. However, Grandfell's expression shifted as he realized the price he had unknowingly paid for using the silver arrows from his inventory. Their high cost left him wondering if he would even be able to retrieve them. He contemplated whether he could find another use for them at a later time. Meanwhile, Jong-yun made her way towards Sungwook. She administered a healing potion from a blue glass-like bottle to him, hoping to alleviate his injuries before more Nolls arrived. The team's survival relied on their unity and quick thinking, and every member played a crucial role in this dangerous battle. Amidst the chaos and danger, Jong-yun managed to persuade Sungwook to drink the healing potion. However, Jong-hoon, who had been grappling with anger, appeared to be on the verge of a breakdown. His teeth clenched, and he muttered a curse word under his breath, directed at the team leader. In a fit of frustration and rage, Jong-hoon attempted to strike the team leader, Keelman, but the latter managed to evade the blow. Jong-hoon was seething with anger, questioning Keelman's judgment and his role as a tanker. His eyes dilated, his brows drew close together, and his mouth hung agape in disbelief. It was clear that he harbored a deep resentment towards Keelman. Keelman, on the other hand, responded with a sneer, despite Jong-hoon's criticism. A demonic laugh echoed throughout the room as Keelman clutched his stomach, trying to suppress his amusement. His laughter only served to further infuriate Jong-hoon, and the rest of the squad members couldn't help but share in Jong-hoon's anger. They had come perilously close to losing their lives, and Keelman's inaction had exacerbated the situation. Jong-hoon asserted that Keelman's position of leadership was only due to his brother's influence, and he questioned if the use of the term hyung had inflated Keelman's ego. Grandfell attempted to mediate, gently patting Jong-hoon on the back to calm him down. While this dispute unfolded, Jong-yun turned her attention to something she spotted from behind, causing her to react with even greater distress. Keelman continued to taunt the squad members, claiming it was amusing to watch a group of idiots struggling before him. He maintained a sly smile on his lips and seemed to be enjoying the chaos. As the tension grew, Grandfell took decisive action. He activated a skill known as the Natural Enemy, which rapidly increased his battle power when facing a demon. His gaze turned cold as he concluded that Keelman was indeed a demon. He muttered, "About time he realized, you dumbass." With the exception of the stoic Grandfell, the other squad members had their mouths hanging open in disbelief. Sungwook, in particular, struggled to comprehend the revelation. He couldn't believe his ears and questioned Grandfell about the possibility of Keelman being a demon, seeking an explanation for this shocking turn of events. The squad now faced a perilous dilemma, with suspicions about their team leader's true nature brewing. As Sungwook looked around, he realized that everything had turned nearly pitch black, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness surrounded him. In front of him, he heard someone laughing loudly. His team members were also present, but the other three were struggling to free themselves from the grasp of the dark smoke that enshrouded them. This ominous smoke seemed to have wrapped itself tightly around their bodies, causing them to float helplessly. In the midst of this disorienting darkness, Jong-hoon, though struggling to speak due to the constricting smoke around her neck, managed to ask for help. Her condition appeared dire, and it was evident that she might not survive for much longer. Blood stained her mouth, nose, and even her tears, as she bled profusely from all her orifices. As Keelman moved closer to Sungwook, his eyes widened, and he found himself frozen in place. A sense of terror overcame him as he heard Jin's words. "A demon is observing you. Your mentality is too low." It seemed that the demon, Keelman, was responsible for this horrifying illusion. The area was filled with the sounds of terrified screams and panicking individuals. Keelman reveled in their fear and laughed at his former team members, who trembled in response to the illusion that tormented them. In the midst of the chaos, Grandfell came charging forward with incredible speed, and Keelman attempted to stab him with a knife. However, the demon residing within Keelman was able to block the attack using a silver plate in his hand. Despite the dire situation, Keelman maintained a smirk on his face, suggesting a permanent air of malevolence about him. The demon, tauntingly, asked Grandfell if he cared about the real Keelman, implying that killing the demon would also result in Keelman's destruction. However, Grandfell remained unperturbed, contemplating his options. Unable to penetrate the demon's armor with his knife, Grandfell decided to exploit any gaps he could find. Despite Keelman's taunts, The two engaged in a rapid and intense battle. In the heat of the fight, the evil Keelman struck Grandfell's face with the blade he held in his right hand, leaving a deep gash in his wake. The battle between the demon and the determined adventurers raged on, and the fate of the team hung in the balance. In a fortunate turn of events, Grandfell managed to avoid any serious injuries during his intense battle with the evil Keelman. As the two adversaries faced off, Keelman initiated a conversation with Grandfell, commenting on the fickle nature of humans. He pointed out how just moments ago, everyone had been friendly with the real Keelman, and now Grandfell was locked in combat with his evil counterpart. However, Keelman's arrogance led to a costly mistake. He left an opening in his defense, allowing Grandfell to deliver a deep and significant cut on his face, running from the top left to the lower right. The air was filled with splatters of blood, and within seconds, Keelman dropped to his knees. He clutched his face with both hands, letting out anguished sobs and cries of pain. The fact that a human was able to inflict such a wound on a demon was a source of great embarrassment. Additionally, Grandfell had used a silver blade, which was far from a typical weapon. Amid the agonizing pain and humiliation, Keelman clenched his jaw and ground his teeth, a hint of fear visible on his face. Grandfell, unmoved by Keelman's suffering, muttered that he had no interest in engaging in conversation for the sake of praise. Keelman's demeanor grew increasingly desperate as he realized the gravity of his situation. In another context, Keelman's face and body were covered in bandages, and he appeared to be in conversation with a young man who seemed to be his brother. However, he appeared distracted, and his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. He offered a sheepish grin by way of apology, and the young man inquired about the cause of his distraction. Keelman replied that it was a minor distraction, prompting the young man to express concern about the potential risks involved. He emphasized the need to avoid harmful ruptures, suggesting that Keelman's condition was delicate. As Keelman conversed with the young man, he initially dismissed his own distractions, replacing one idea with another. The young man suggested that Keelman cease his involvement with the ruptures and instead join his guild to serve as an analyst for them. Keelman, in response, emitted a forced laugh and expressed his desire to live life as a loser. In the scene, there were 3 men present, with their leader standing in the center. This leader had brown hair, a mustache, and slightly arched eyebrows. He wore a brown polo shirt that accentuated his muscular frame. In a form of greeting, he extended his hand skyward, and it seemed there might be an element of irony or extreme confusion as he inquired about Keelman's name. He asked if Keelman was Taemin's older brother and commented that he had heard about Taemin's recent success in clearing a boss raid. He requested that Keelman convey his greetings to Taemin on his behalf. The leader took the opportunity to tease Keelman, implying that he should strive harder to avoid causing any disgrace to his brother. He even went as far as to cast doubt on whether Keelman and Taemin were biologically related. The leader continued to jest, questioning what Keelman actually did in the ruptures and suggesting that he should heed his brother's advice to avoid any potential harm. Despite the mockery, Keelman managed to offer a faint smile and laugh. It was apparent that he longed to be a brother his younger sibling could be proud of. However, the situation took a sinister turn when a demon seized upon Keelman's sense of helplessness. The demon made a suggestion that he would help, allowing Keelman to watch from the background as he took control of the situation. Suddenly, Keelman's mind was invaded by the presence of a demon imp, which accused him of having a low mentality. Keelman's eyes widened in shock at the sudden appearance of the demon imp, and the circumstances quickly spiraled out of control. The demon imp swiftly took control of Keelman's body, beginning with a simple suggestion to lead the other members of the team in their first attack. Keelman had no intention of obeying, but he found himself unable to control his own body. His mind remained the only part of him that functioned independently. He could think, but he was powerless to act. Keelman realized it was too late to scream at the other squad members, but he did it anyway. Crying and desperately struggling to break free from the demon imp's grip, he attempted to convey the truth to his team members, hoping they might understand his predicament. In the end, there was nothing Keelman could do about the situation. His mentality wasn't strong enough to resist the demon that had possessed him, leaving him powerless to put up any kind of fight. The demon had taken control because Keelman's actions had put everyone's lives in danger, and he felt both helpless and responsible for the predicament he had created. Keelman had been overthinking what would happen when Grandfell attacked the demon imp residing within him. When the confrontation reached its peak, Grandfell made a decisive move. With a single slash of his blade, he severed the demon imp's neck, effectively cutting off the source of Keelman's possession. The moment the demon imp was vanquished, Keelman's true self returned. He quickly got to his feet, speaking gibberish as he was gripped by terror and panic. The other members of the team watched him with worried expressions, and Keelman reached out to touch his own face to confirm that he was still alive. He was bewildered by the fact that he had been possessed by a demon. A familiar voice broke through Keelman's distress, and it served as a rude awakening. It was Grandfell, standing about a meter away with his arms folded across his chest. He reassured Keelman, saying, "I told you, you do not need to worry, for I am here." His words were spoken with a sense of authority, and he seemed to have regained the respect of Hoyeol and the rest of the team. Sungwook, who had been expressionless earlier, had his lips slightly open in surprise. Jonghoon, who had mocked Grandfell as a newbie, was now taken aback and filled with disbelief. Jongyun's eyes welled up with tears, and she had her hands over her mouth, stunned by the events that had transpired. The team had witnessed a remarkable and unexpected turn of events, and it was clear that Grandfell's actions had left a lasting impression on all of them. Grandfell looked at the others with amusement and admiration. He explained that demons draw strength from the negative emotions humans experience, and thus, they should be prideful and unafraid of demons. He clarified that a demon hunter's attacks only affect the demon, which is why he is still alive. Hoyeol, on the other hand, felt satisfied with himself for not forgetting this logic. Both Grandfell and Hoyeol then examined their inventory, finding that no items had dropped, only a demon imp. They didn't seem too impressed with their loot and joked about how it was a great way to start their demon hunting career. In a summary of the day's events, Keelman shared that during the Rupture raid, he had shown Taemin something on his phone. When Taemin finished reading it, he couldn't believe that Keelman expected him to believe such an absurd proposition, even if he was a guild leader. He expressed his doubt but was interrupted by Keelman, who revealed that the possessed party leader was himself. Taemin was shocked, and the coffee he was supposed to drink ended up on the table instead of in his mouth. Taemin, a level 300 player ranked 11th in Jaein Guildmaster, asked Keelman if he genuinely wanted to change careers and become an analyst for the Jaeons. He found it hard to believe that his brother had suddenly come around to the idea. Keelman pretended to chuckle and made a joke about Taemin's difficulty in trusting his brother. However, Taemin insisted on knowing if Keelman was joking and pointed his index finger at him. Keelman abruptly dropped his cup onto the table and confessed that he was entirely serious about the matter. He mentioned that it was because of Grandfell that he had become aware of his weaknesses and the true nature of his role. He acknowledged that he had struggled to keep up with Taemin until now, but was considering taking pride in himself and forging his own path. Keelman threw a hold-on gesture with a genuine smile on his face, leaving Taemin to wonder about the kind of person Grandfell was, given the profound change in his brother. Taemin pointed out that the fact that the normality status didn't harm Grandfell in any way, aside from tracking down the imp, suggested an extraordinary mindset stat. He also found it curious that Grandfell chose to fight with a dagger instead of magic. He couldn't quite figure out which class Grandfell might belong to, despite the thousands of classes in Archina. Keelman acknowledged that his brother would indeed find the story hard to believe but stated, "Trust me, this ain't." Taemin cut off his words, affirming that he did trust Keelman. He considered Keelman a trustworthy witness and a pivotal figure in his life. Taemin's success and position in life were, in part, due to Keelman. He trusted his brother even more than he could have imagined. In fact, he had brought a contract with him and slid it in front of Keelman to read. Taemin put on a small smile, noting that Keelman was his older brother, and now he was the prided Jaein analyst. Keelman, his cheeks showing a faint blush due to embarrassment, fiddled with his glasses as he spoke. Upon reading the contract, Keelman seemed alarmed by the conditions it contained. Meanwhile, Grandfell was seen brushing his teeth at his home. Hoyeol had a contented expression on his face as his level increased. He had reached level 67, and rather than increasing by just one level, it had increased by a significant 12 levels. Hoyeol also checked the numbers displayed on the monitor simultaneously, perhaps indicating some significant developments or revelations. Hoyeol had every reason to be thrilled. Recent achievements had him buzzing with energy. Hoyeol was quick to counter his argument, insisting that the removal of a single imp had boosted their levels by a whopping 12 points. Despite the ongoing disagreement, they eventually left the bathroom. Grandfell was now dressed, looking somewhat perturbed, while Hoyeol was still wrapped in his towel and couldn't tear his gaze away from the monitor. As time passed, Hoyle's excitement seemed to be unwavering, and Grandfell decided to let him handle the distribution of stat points, disinterested in these in-game matters. However, Hoyeol eventually gave up on this task, fatigued from the day's events. He decided to think about it later, in bed, after drying his hair. When they arrived in their bedroom, Grandfell was met with an unexpected sight. The state of their room was chaotic, and he couldn't stand it any longer. With a frown on his face, he took it upon himself to start a cleaning operation. He donned gloves, a mask, a head cap, and an apron, and grabbed a feather duster, ready to restore order to their living space. Grandfell believed that a clean environment was essential for a clear mind, and he meticulously dusted and tidied up while Hoyeol, somewhat disheartened and drained, took a seat and observed him. As the sun began to set outside, Grandfell started preparing the evening meal, a hearty vegetable soup. He tasted it, and his expression softened as he expressed his satisfaction with the healthy flavor. It was clear that Grandfell's meticulous nature extended to their dietary choices. While they sat down to enjoy their dinner, Hoyeol observed Grandfell as he dutifully washed the dishes. At that moment, a realization dawned on Hoyeol. He understood the positive impact Grandfell had on his life. Grandfell's habits and practices from their virtual world had transcended into their real world, making Hoyeol healthier, both physically and mentally. Hoyeol, now appreciating the value of their differences and the positive influence Grandfell had on him, silently contemplated their unique partnership. Hoyeol, his mind racing with thoughts about Grandfell's remarkable abilities, was determined to explore the depths of his roommate's talents. He couldn't believe that Grandfell's skills were limited to just one realm. It seemed like his abilities spanned various domains. He could replicate spells effortlessly after observing them once, demonstrating incredible aptitude in the art of magic. Alongside his magical prowess, Grandfell also possessed a high level of physical fitness and intelligence. As Hoyeol pondered these attributes, he decided to jot them down on a piece of paper to better understand the scope of Grandfell's capabilities. With this newfound information, Hoyeol figured that if these talents could be harnessed in the real world, Grandfell had untapped potential that could be put to remarkable use. This realization led him to wonder how they could explore these possibilities. Just as Hoyeol was lost in thought, a notification popped up on Grandfell's phone. It was a message from someone named Nam Keelman, who identified himself as the party leader from yesterday's Rapture raid. Nam Keelman was interested in recruiting Grandfell for Korea's #1 ranking guild, the Jaein Guild. Hoyeol watched Grandfell's reaction as he received the message, observing his roommate's puzzled expression. Nam Keelman sent a file that likely contained a contract or more information about the guild. However, Grandfell seemed to be clueless about what was going on and contemplated rejecting the offer for now. It was clear that this was a new and unfamiliar world for Grandfell, and he wasn't ready to dive into it just yet. With a sense of intrigue and determination, Hoyeol decided to administer a little test to explore Grandfell's ability to replicate spells. He quickly turned to YouTube, typing in search terms and scrolling through videos of various spells. Meanwhile, Grandfell remained focused on understanding the unfamiliar territory of guild offers. As Hoyeol searched for spells, two other individuals, Keelman and Taemin, observed Grandfell's nonchalant response to the guild offer with disbelief. They had sent a lengthy message, but Grandfell's reply was short and straightforward, a resounding no. Keelman's face was visibly tense, his forehead beading with sweat as he contemplated the possibility of Grandfell receiving an offer from another guild. Taemin, on the other hand, seemed utterly furious. He slammed his elbow onto the table, making a loud noise. He ranted about how the most successful guild in South Korea, Jaein, had offered Grandfell a house, a car, and all expenses covered in exchange for a 95 to 5% deal. But there was another guild that had made a more enticing offer, further fueling Taemin's frustration. He was incensed and looked like a beast as he spoke vehemently about the situation, growing even angrier by the second. Keelman, in an attempt to avoid confrontation, pretended to adjust his glasses and mumbled that he wasn't sure about all this. The situation had escalated, with emotions running high and tensions flaring. The quiet apartment was now filled with the electric atmosphere of opportunity and disappointment, as well as the potential for incredible growth and uncertain decisions. As the conversation in their apartment continued, Taemin couldn't help but ponder the audacity of the individual who had approached Grandfell with such an enticing offer. He considered that even if it wasn't a foreign guild, all the top guilds were based in Seoul. Nam Keelman was deep in thought, speculating about the identity of the person who had entered their territory. Taemin suddenly got up from his seat, agitated, and slammed both his palms down on the table. He was convinced that there was no other guild that could match the offer made to Grandfell. This contract was something he couldn't even show to the higher-ups of Jaein Guild, given the exclusivity of the deal. Taemin was fully aware that he couldn't let this matter go. He demanded that Keelman describe Grandfell's appearance. Keelman was curious and asked why he was doing that. Taemin's response was clear. He intended to recruit Grandfell into their guild before any other guild could snatch him away. This decision was made with a sense of urgency and determination. Meanwhile, Grandfell was calmly using a cup of tea as a makeshift phone stand, watching a video where someone demonstrated magical techniques. As he observed, he diligently took notes in his notebook. On the other hand, Hoyeol was engrossed in Grandfell's notes. His eyes widened as he reviewed the contents, almost as if he had seen a ghost. The video showed the fundamentals of magic, and Hoyeol was convinced that he could make use of these techniques, provided he had the necessary mana. In a moment of admiration and encouragement, Hoyeol ruffled Grandfell's hair and gave him a thumbs up. Grandfell, with a hint of irritation, muttered something under his breath. Afterward, Hoyeol left Grandfell with a messy hairdo and set to work distributing stat points. He recognized the potential in Grandfell's talents and wanted to keep his options open. 2 points went into stamina and agility, while 7 were allocated to mana, given Grandfell's initial deficiency. Hoyeol was also aware of Grandfell's personal story, being the sole survivor of his family. In response, he made a life-altering decision for his character. Grandfell Claudi Arpeus Romeo embarked on the path of a demon hunter, seeking vengeance for his family. Hoyeol, lying comfortably on his bed, was once again reminded of the phrase he had written, "Put one in luck." It had been on his mind, and he was about to take action. Staring at the monitor in front of him, a wide grin spread across his face. He believed that this small adjustment to his character's stats was for both his and Grandfell's sake. It marked the beginning of a new era where they would have to put in a lot of effort and hard work. With resolve, Hoyeol raised his luck stat from 1 to 2, effectively doubling his luck. He closed his eyes and contemplated the potential impact of this change. Who knows, maybe I'll find a coin on the road tomorrow, he mused as he began to drift off to sleep. The next morning, both Hoyeol and Grandfell were fixated on the monitor. Hoyeol's eyes widened as a grin slowly crept across his face. It seemed that the wishful thinking about finding a coin had indeed come true, but this coin was much more than it appeared to be. Hoyeol had received a class quest, a rare and significant event in the gaming world. As the Archana had become part of reality, quests have become increasingly uncommon. In the real world, there simply weren't many NPCs to give out quests, making even normal quests a rare occurrence. However, the class quest was something extraordinary. Hoyeol believed this particular quest was related to his Demon Hunter class. The significance of a class quest lay in the fact that it was only provided to one player of a specific class, making it headline news. It was a notable achievement, and people often marveled at the incredible nature of these quests. However, Grandfell couldn't believe his eyes. He was shocked by what he saw on his laptop screen. The news article announced a Paladin class quest, and the headline read, "Guyver begins the class quest." It featured a picture of Guyver, who was clearly elated after receiving this quest. Grandfell knew that class quests were rare and only given to one player of a specific class. It was illogical for a player like Hoyeol, who was only at level 67, to receive such a quest. Hoyle's assumption that he was the last remaining demon hunter seemed to be correct, and he found himself in deep thought, considering the implications of this revelation. The role of demon hunter was often associated with those who hunted demons, but as he would soon discover, the reality was quite different. As Hoyeol and Grandfell arrived at their destination, a place called Action Station, they were met by a stern demon hunter training instructor. He was so heavily clad in clothing that, were it not for his face, nothing else would be visible. The instructor wasted no time and immediately initiated the admission ceremony for the new recruits. The first task set for these aspiring demon hunters was nothing short of shocking. They were to climb a cliff that was a staggering 1,000 meters high. The expression of horror was etched across the faces of all the new recruits, including Grandfell. They wondered how it could possibly be humanly achievable. It seemed that the instructors at Action Station had something entirely different in mind for their training. As they began their ascent up the towering cliff, the other demon hunters followed their instructor, and Grandfell was right behind him. They clung to vine branches for stability. The pain and strain of the climb intense, causing some to tremble and one to fall. By the time they reached the top, one person was already lying unconscious on the ground. Those who had successfully scaled the cliff were shown the rooms they would be staying in. The accommodations left much to be desired. The facilities were inadequate, and the rooms were in disarray, with cracked walls and fallen rocks scattered about. Despite the challenging start to their training, it was finally time to eat. However, the instructor informed them that the cafeteria was back down at the base of the cliff. This meant they had to make the treacherous descent after their exhausting climb, and one recruit was so worn out that he was practically crawling on the ground. While most would have considered giving up, Grandfell, true to his nature, disagreed. He seemed to have an unwavering determination that set him apart. Hoyeol and Grandfell, taking a moment to reflect on their experiences, came to the conclusion that the demons they had encountered in their journey operated by delving into the minds of humans. These encounters had served as a form of training, making them stronger over time. They even discussed the concept of middle school syndrome, recognizing its impact on their lives. Hoyle's agreement with Grandfell led them to make a decision. They needed to investigate the nature of the quest they had received. As Grandfell manipulated the screen, Hoyle's expression shifted, his head turned slightly to the right, and he curved the corners of his mouth downward. On the contrast, at the same time, at the Anti-Archana United Korean branch, the facility established to mitigate the damage and chaos caused by the introduction of Archana into the real world. To achieve this, they recruited employees who had contributed to the creation of Archana and hired them. The staff at the branch worked diligently to research anything related to Archana, and they provided their findings to players. However, the nature of their work was taking a toll. The staff was constantly overworked, with long hours spent seated in front of their computers. The demanding nature of their tasks caused physical discomfort. At this, two employees seemed conversing, discussing the likelihood of further Archana updates. The conversation evolved into a source of rumors, with one employee expressing concern about someone named Raymond who managed the home page and consistently uploaded updated content. His companion advised him to keep refreshing the page. As they continued to converse, the situation took a surprising turn. An update suddenly appeared on the home page, confirming the reality of their conversation. This unexpected turn of events was met with frustration and disbelief. The employee checked the monitor to ensure its accuracy. As the news of the update spread through the office, chaos ensued, leaving both employees deeply intrigued by the intricacies of this gaming world. As the unexpected update in the gaming world continued to astonish the employees at the Anti-Archana United Korean branch, chaos began to ensue. One employee decided to run, possibly to hand in his resignation as soon as possible. However, the urgency of the situation was pressing, and another employee emphasized the need to disconnect the phone lines as reporters would soon start contacting them. Despite these urgent concerns, one of the employees appeared oblivious to the commotion around him. His attention was solely fixed on the monitor as new information began to unfold. The monitor displayed ominous messages that hinted at impending danger. A new demon will come to you soon, followed by a list of locations and the levels of monstrous creatures. The ranks and levels mentioned were startling. Bloody Bandit level 230, Bloody Beast level 220 to 250, Countess Kira's Soldier level 300, Countess Kira's Knight level 350. Countess Kira's Devotee level 390, and a newly named monster, Countess Kira level 430. Both the employee and his co-worker, who stood beside him, were left in utter disbelief. The message indicated that the boss of this dungeon was at level 430, implying that this was not an update meant to be easily cleared. The manager expressed his doubts, suggesting that even a group of top-ranked players working together would not be enough to tackle this problem. His co-worker, however, believed that it would require an entire association. The discussion turned to the Magic Tower, with the lead manager suggesting they seek assistance from the NPCs inside. But his co-worker had a different opinion, stating that if the tower itself wasn't in danger, the non-playable characters within would remain passive, taking no action to help. At this point, the manager grew increasingly serious, asserting that it was impossible to handle the situation, and their role seemed to be to stand by and watch other people die. This grim realization left his co-worker feeling defeated, convinced that it was over, and a rupture would inevitably occur. The mention of a rupture raid, if unsuccessful, led to panic and frustration. The manager believed that the consequences of a failed raid could be catastrophic. The updates had been manageable until now, but this particular update disrupted the balance of the game, leaving them unable to comprehend the situation. It seemed that only a miraculous intervention could save them from the impending crisis. The class quest titled Prologue of the Counterattack was their only hope, a last chance for their last remaining demon hunter to make a difference and confront the looming threat. Grandfell's training began with repeated quests, each more challenging than the last. He knew he had to train rigorously to strengthen his weakened body and sharpen his skills. Day by day, he dedicated himself to this relentless pursuit, never wavering in his determination. On this particular day, Grandfell found himself in a state of physical exhaustion. He sat in a quiet corner, sipping on a cup of tea, his body trembling from the intensity of his training. He had already completed a 20-kilometer run, performed 500 pull-ups, and endured 300 grueling burpee tests. But there remained one final daunting task: 1,000 push-ups. Every muscle in his body quivered, and the tea in his cup shook as a result. As Grandfell focused on his last challenge, his friend Hoyeol observed him with concern. Hoyeol rested his palms on his face, appearing troubled. He questioned whether the sudden increase in the training's intensity was wise, fearing for Grandfell's well-being. The thought of his friend pushing himself to the point of danger troubled him deeply. Despite the physical torment, Grandfell persevered. He struggled to even make a sandwich properly, but he pressed on. As he attempted to take a bite, the contents fell onto his plate. Hoyeol couldn't help but smile, finding a certain charm in Grandfell's determination, even in the face of futility. With his last push-up complete, Grandfell's body still shook with fatigue, but a sense of satisfaction washed over him. His pride in accomplishing every single task kept him from giving up. He had finished the quest for the day, and so he retired to his bed, wrapping himself in a blanket, and eventually drifted into a deep slumber. The following day, Grandfell continued his training, this time with pull-ups. His body still trembled from the intense exercise, and the pain was excruciating. However, he refused to give in. He knew his pride was on the line, and he maintained his composure despite the overwhelming difficulty of the pull-ups. On the other hand, Hoyeol's face contorted in concern as he watched his friend struggle. He clenched his teeth so tightly that it seemed they might shatter. Beads of sweat flowed down his face, forming rivulets, giving the impression that they could fill a bucket. And finally, his veins bulged beneath his skin, a testament to the intensity of the training. The days were passing, and Grandfell and Hoyeol were locked in a relentless cycle of repeating the same grueling training quests for an entire week. Each day, they pushed themselves to the limit, and every time Grandfell completed one task, another seemed to take its place. The strain was evident as Grandfell slumped onto a bench, his body still shaking uncontrollably from the rigorous training. Two figures sat across from him, seemingly unfazed by the intense exercise. They were sorting chilies and listening to music on the radio. Hoyeol watched Grandfell and couldn't help but admire his friend's unwavering determination. He believed that it was Grandfell's unique characteristics that allowed him to endure the daily challenges. However, Hoyeol couldn't help but wonder how many times they'd have to repeat the quest before they'd be eligible for the coveted reward. As Hoyeol contemplated the nature of the reward, a hologram suddenly materialized before them. The announcement took them both by surprise. You have completed a week's worth of today's goal. You have fulfilled the conditions. You have been rewarded stamina +2 and dexterity +2. The prospect of receiving permanent stat bonuses was astonishing. In their world, raising one's stats was an expensive endeavor, often costing millions of currency for just a single point. But now, they had gained a total of 4 stat points without even leveling up. It was a remarkable boon, and the realization that this might be the reward for every completed repeat quest left Hoyeol both excited and nervous. Grandfell, on the other hand, was ready to repeat the process multiple times a day if it meant accumulating such fantastic rewards. Amid their musings, a news report blared from the radio. The latest updates in the world have been causing quite a stir. Most guilds had given up on the new Rupture Raid, a challenging quest. A new territory called the Count family's territory was introduced in this update, along with a formidable new monster known as Count Escura, a demon and vampire hybrid, with a level of 130. This was the highest level any of them had seen, and it seemed that the Rupture Raid was about to become the most daunting in the game's history. The news sent shockwaves through the gaming community, and the announcement left many with no words to say. In the present moment, Grandfell found himself in the restroom, multitasking as he brushed his teeth and checked the news on his phone. The news report had his full attention, and it was not surprising given the gravity of the information. It seemed that Count Ascura, a monstrous boss with a staggering level of 430, was making headlines across every news outlet. He was destined to be the most challenging boss in the history of the game. The sheer danger posed by this formidable adversary had led many large guilds to decline the rupture that featured Count Ascura. Grandfell couldn't fathom how any individual or group could overcome a foe of this magnitude. Meanwhile, in another part of their virtual world, Hoyeol sat in front of his laptop, looking stressed and miserable. He shared his perspective on the game's most challenging aspect, the demons. Players who engaged in battles against these creatures faced a constant barrage of status abnormalities, and it was widely believed that to defeat a demon, one needed to be at least 10 levels higher. Count Ascura's level made him an even more terrifying prospect, and Hoyeol couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. As Hoyeol contemplated the situation, he realized that Count Ascura was the only vampire in the game currently. It struck him that the new class quest he was pursuing might be directing him to confront this monstrous vampire. The impending challenge weighed heavily on his mind, as it seemed almost impossible to defeat such a formidable enemy. However, as Hoyeol grappled with fear and uncertainty, Grandfell's expression had turned menacing. He was baffled by the notion that an inferior species posed any threat to his valuable time. In response, he made a silent vow to exact severe retribution on those who dared to impede his progress. It was clear that Grandfell had tapped into a different emotion, one driven by vengeance and determination. The complex feelings and reactions of both Grandfell and Hoyeol highlighted the contrasting elements of their personalities as they faced this daunting challenge. Grandfell was known for his unwavering desire to accomplish the impossible, and today was no exception. He had a monumental task at hand, to vanquish a formidable monster known as Count Ascura. With resolute determination, Grandfell embarked on his mission to defeat this menacing creature. Grandfell was meticulously planning his next move. He sat on the floor, phone in hand, his chin resting on his other hand, scrolling through a wealth of information. The search results were in, and they revealed an intriguing piece of information. Count Ascura was currently located in Russia. Grandfell realized that in order to confront Count Ascura, he needed a way to get to Russia quickly. He knew that the Mage Tower held the key to his swift travel. Inside the Mage Tower was a portal, a powerful magical artifact that could transport its user to any location in an instant. Recognizing the importance of this portal, Grandfell made a decision. He needed to head to the Mage Tower without delay. The Mage Tower was renowned for its magical prowess and was situated just a short distance away. It was the perfect starting point for his journey to Russia. As Grandfell contemplated how to reach the Mage Tower, the idea of calling a taxi crossed his mind. However, he was urged to act swiftly by his companion, Hoyeol. The urgency of the situation was evident, and there was no time to lose. As Grandfell prepared to leave, Hoyeol couldn't help but express his concern. Russia was known for its bone-chilling cold, and at that very moment, the temperature was a frigid -2 degrees. Nevertheless, Grandfell's determination burned hotter than any icy winds that might cross his path. Just as Grandfell was about to open the door and set off on his quest, he realized he had forgotten something of great importance. It wasn't a warm puffer jacket that he had picked up, as Hoyeol had expected. Instead, it was his beloved tea. Grandfell made sure to pack several sachets of tea into his suit. He insisted that he could not afford to miss his tea time, even in the face of such a daunting mission. Meanwhile, outside the Mage Tower, a bustling scene was unfolding. Numerous people had gathered, most of them being reporters eager for the latest scoop. Among them were two men engaged in a conversation. One of them, dressed in a sharp suit, appeared to be a reporter, while the other seemed to be a cameraman. The reporter expressed uncertainty about whether the Jain Guild would show up. The cameraman, however, confidently asserted that they would undoubtedly arrive, citing the proximity of their current location to the Mage Tower and the fact that the new rupture was in Russia. The conversation continued, with the possibility of the Jain Guild using portal magic for their journey being raised. The two men discussed the rarity of rankers capable of utilizing portal magic and the significant amount of mana required for such a feat. As the conversation between the two men continued, an unexpected turn of events unfolded. Their discussion was abruptly interrupted when a group of individuals, unmistakably the Jain Guild, caught their attention. The Jain Guild was striding confidently toward the Mage Tower, and at the forefront was a formidable figure named Taemin, who effortlessly carried a massive sword over his shoulder. Beside him was his brother, Keelman, exuding an air of refined sophistication in his black suit. The rest of the guild members followed closely behind, presenting an intimidating presence. Reporters on the scene immediately sprang into action, sprinting toward the guild members in the hopes of gaining information and news for their respective agencies. One reporter from KBC rushed toward Taemin, wasting no time in trying to get an exclusive word from the Jaein Guild. He fired off questions, inquiring if they were planning to raid the new rupture and if they intended to share information about it with other guilds. He also sought to understand why they had chosen to enter the rupture earlier than other guilds. However, Taemin remained silent, and Keelman raised his hands in a gesture signaling the reporters to cease their questioning. The reporters were eager to secure the scoop, but it was becoming apparent that Taemin was not willing to divulge any information. In the midst of this fervor, an intern named Lee Yonho from MBS's news department went at great lengths to get as close as possible to Taemin. He specifically asked if the Jaein Guild had formulated a strategy to combat Count Askira. This question piqued the interest of the crowd, and even Keelman suggested that the interview should take place at a later time. However, Taemin, the guild master, couldn't help but release a muffled but audible laugh. He admitted that it was a shame because he didn't know how to kill Count Askira. He somewhat dismissed the notion of considering such things when entering ruptures. Keelman's face immediately paled upon hearing his brother's response, and he tried to intervene. He clarified that Taemin claimed their primary motivation for entering the rupture ahead of other guilds was to outperform their competitors. When it came to sharing information, Taemin was clear, absolutely not. He even suggested that they might demand it, ostensibly for the sake of world peace. Yet, he couldn't help but question whether those who professed to fight for world peace were acting like cowards by watching from a distance rather than challenging the ruptures themselves. Lee Yonho, the intern, was left speechless, struggling to process Taemin's unexpected and enigmatic response. The Jaein Guild's arrival had injected a new layer of intrigue and mystery into the unfolding events, leaving the reporters and onlookers with more questions than answers. As the Jaein Guild's interaction with reporters continued, the focus shifted to another significant figure approaching the Mage Tower. The keen-eyed cameraman noticed the arrival of the Shining Guild, and he was determined to capture a moment with their guild master, Lox, a renowned and formidable player with a level of 399, ranking as the second-best player in the game. Lox had an air of confidence about him, walking with a smug expression that resembled that of a king. His guild members followed him, reinforcing the aura of power surrounding the Shining Guild. Recognizing the large crowd and potential safety concerns, a person dressed in a suit advised the guild to continue on foot, likely responsible for the security of the Mage Tower. Lox graciously complied with the request, offering a friendly smile and nod. He was unfazed by the commotion. In the distance, one of his guild members observed the Jaein Guild. To Lox, Taemin's strong statements likely seemed to stem from anxiety caused by the Mage Tower's significance. Keelman, who was observing Taemin closely, expressed his perspective on the situation. He assured Taemin that there was no reason to be overly concerned. They simply needed to approach things methodically and proceed step by step. He believed that by taking things slowly, they could overcome any challenges that arose. Taemin's expression shifted from one of discontent to determination, and he transitioned from a frown to a smile. He couldn't help but think about Hoyeol, whom Keelman had promised to contact and invite to their guild. Keelman decided to change the subject, mentioning that he had tried to alter the terms to get in touch with Hoyeol once more, but an update had occurred. At that moment, Taemin had a realization. Considering Keelman's statement about Hoyeol's immense power, there was a possibility that Hoyeol might attempt to raid the rupture as well. The prospect of encountering Hoyeol within the Mage Tower added a new layer of intrigue and uncertainty to the unfolding events. As Grandfell continued his journey towards the Mage Tower, he found himself riding a bus, his earbuds securely in both ears and his phone in his hands. He was engrossed in watching a news report about a young man with a level of 300 who was demonstrating fire magic. It was the 100th video he had watched on the subject, and by this point, he felt like he had a thorough understanding of it. In the video, he learned about the 3 levels of magic activation: inspecting, interfering, and manifesting mana. Grandfell had meticulously followed these rules and had no doubt in his ability to produce a small flame in his hand. However, as the fire grew larger, a fellow passenger noticed it, and the bus driver scolded him for using his magical skills inside the bus. Hoyeol, although not physically present, became frantic at the situation, and even though Grandfell was the only one who could hear him, he took the time to apologize profusely. He mentioned that he hadn't realized he could manifest the flame so easily. In his thoughts, Grandfell assured Hoyeol that he could fully control the flame and would extinguish it if it caused fear among the passengers. Despite the surprising ease with which he had mastered this new ability by simply watching a video, Grandfell couldn't help but feel a bit worried about the skills he now possessed. Nevertheless, he believed that these newfound abilities could be helpful. However, his concern grew when he noticed that the new skill didn't immediately appear in his stat window as it should have. This discrepancy made him wonder if there was a bug or some other reason behind it. These thoughts lingered in his mind as he got off the bus. At the same time, inside the Mage Tower, numerous people were gathered, many of them in front of the portal. Grandfell's gaze wandered around the tower's interior, noticing that it had an entirely different appearance from its exterior. As he raised his head to examine the portal more closely, he felt something unusual. It was a vague sensation, but he believed he could manifest this portal magic himself. Just as he began contemplating the possibilities, something unexpected happened. A young man, carrying something on his shoulder, was in a hurry to call the Jayan Guild over for an analyst briefing. In his haste, he didn't notice Grandfell and accidentally pushed him into the portal. As he walked along the path, his senses suddenly came to a complete halt. He realized he had made a mistake and needed to apologize to someone. However, as he looked ahead, he noticed that the person he was supposed to apologize to had already passed through a mystical portal. From afar, Jayan Guild Master Taemin observed the young man's clumsiness. He contemplated whether it was time to let the young man go from his duties. Overhearing this conversation, the young man hurriedly approached the guild master, hoping to express his regrets. But the guild master was preoccupied with thoughts of his own. Keelman, who was standing beside Taemin, focused on repairing his eyewear, attempting to sharpen his vision. In the midst of these interactions, Nam Keelman, following the guild master's command, picked up a remote and began a briefing. The location of a new rupture was in Russia, and Nam Keelman displayed a map-like graphic on his screen. The outer circle contained hundreds of entrances into the territory, which marked the territory's outskirts. The inner circle represented the Count family's territory, with approximately 30 entrances in total. Finally, at the center of it all was the innermost circle, known as the Fortress Rupture, where Count Ascura was rumored to reside. This was based on assumptions derived from the graph's shapes and past patterns. Meanwhile, inside the mystical portal, several reporters and adventurers were on the brink of a thrilling experience. The portal had transported them to Russia, and the area was already bustling with activity. Reporters and players alike were exploring this new, uncharted territory. Kid PL, a vlogger, was conducting a live video blog on his phone, surrounded by live comments from his viewers. He was excited to provide them with content from this exotic location. Kid PL was about to embark on a mini tour of the rupture when he spotted someone familiar a few meters away. It was Grandfell, who had ventured into the portal as well. Kid PL approached him, offering a friendly warning and placing his hand on Grandfell's chest to halt him, ensuring that manners were maintained in this unknown and potentially dangerous realm. As Grandfell approached him with an air of authority, Kid PL stood frozen, not from the biting cold of the 2-degree weather but from sheer terror. Grandfell leaned in close to Kid PL's face, his voice hushed but filled with unsettling intensity. "I don't have any patience left in me right now." With a lingering aura of intimidation, Grandfell continued on his path. The territory's outskirts seemed to be designated for levels ranging from 240 to 270, and signs of destruction were already evident, with a progress rate of 9.7%. As Grandfell continued his journey, he contemplated the hope for warmth in the near future. Meanwhile, a battle raged nearby. A young lady with fiery orange hair and green eyes was locked in combat with a monstrous adversary. Her swift and precise blade work left a trail of blood on her face, indicating a fierce struggle. Her companions urged her to slow down, acknowledging her high level, but she seemed determined to press forward. The young lady in question was Leonie Belusi, with a player ranking in the top 100 and a formidable level of 348. She was the guild master of the Berserker Guild, known for her fiery temper and strong combat skills. As Grandfell navigated the area, a bitter wind swirled around him, intensifying the already frigid temperatures. The icy weather seemed to fuel his determination. Grandfell believed that these conditions were ideal for hunting, and his resolve grew stronger. He had a purpose, a mission. However, as Grandfell continued his journey, he began to sense a growing presence behind him. The sounds of approaching footsteps became apparent. To his surprise, it was a pack of bloodied wolves, each with a level of 230. Their dark fur made them almost invisible in the night, except for their crimson eyes that glowed ominously. The wolves advanced with growls and gnashing teeth, a formidable challenge for anyone, even for someone as skilled as Grandfell. At this moment, his own level was a mere 67, and the odds seemed overwhelmingly against him. Despite the dire situation, Grandfell's confidence did not waver. He activated a skill known as Natural Enemy, a testament to his unwavering determination to emerge victorious. He held his dagger firmly in his hand, a smirk forming on his lips. Mocking the dire circumstances, Grandfell sneered, "You chose the wrong owner." With that, he prepared to confront the oncoming pack of wolves, determined to prove that even against impossible odds, he would stand his ground. The battle was about to begin, and Grandfell was ready to show that he could overcome any challenge, no matter how daunting. With a wolf rapidly approaching, Grandfell's face remained unflinching, betraying no hint of fear. His furrowed brows and piercing gaze, cold and sharp, gave the impression that he could stare into the depths of one's soul and melt it away. He was the embodiment of unwavering determination, and as the wolf charged, he muttered under his breath, "Hunt a vampire. Let it be known that the hunting has begun." In the midst of this confrontation, Leonie, the guild master, was not far away, yelling curses at the wolves and using her formidable combat skills to drive them away with powerful kicks. Her guild members, however, watched from the sidelines, seemingly resigned to her fiery temperament. It was clear that no one dared to interfere with her. As Leonie's relentless assault continued, the final wolf met its demise, reduced to a lifeless, bloody puddle on the ground. Leonie finally ceased her cursing, and one of her guild members expressed frustration, pointing out that they had already slain dozens of these wolves. It seemed like an endless task, with no respite in sight. But that wasn't the end. More wolves were on their way, and the guild members were growing increasingly uneasy. As Leonie inquired about the strange behavior of the wolves, her guildmates were taken aback. They couldn't comprehend the wolves' odd lack of fear and awareness. The guild member with blonde hair dismissed her concerns, saying, "Don't act sharp," while another with long hair muttered a similar sentiment. Despite their skepticism, Leonie couldn't shake the ominous feeling that something was amiss. She turned to the rest of the guild, questioning whether they had noticed the wolves whimpering or howling in pain as they hunted them. The guild members were left dumbfounded, their brows furrowed and mouths agape. It seemed that her inquiry had sparked some unsettling realizations. As the guild members exchanged puzzled glances, they came to a collective understanding. The wolves' howls were not typical at all. They indicated not aggression but fear. The revelation left them bewildered and concerned. Something unusual and unsettling was happening in the snowy landscape. Leonie decided they needed to investigate further, urging her guild members to follow her. As they ventured to discover the source of this mysterious phenomenon, Grandfell remained focused, his bow poised to take action. He claimed to sense the mana at the tip of an arrow, hinting at some arcane capability he possessed. It was not a conventional arrow, but rather, it seemed he could manipulate the mana within it to manifest a solution to their current predicament. As Grandfell's flaming arrow pierced the first wolf, a sudden transformation overcame the entire pack. The wolves froze in their tracks, aghast by the fire. Even those in the front of the group shuffled backward in an attempt to escape the searing flames. It was a remarkable sight, and their reaction was nothing short of astonishing. Meanwhile, the members of the Berserker Guild, who had been sprinting to catch up with their guild master, were left breathless by the breathtaking spectacle. From a distance, they observed Grandfell seated nonchalantly on a massive rock, legs crossed and a cup in hand. It appeared as though he was in the middle of his tea time, utterly unruffled by the fiery chaos unfolding around him. One of the guild members squatted down to inspect the fire arrows embedded in the wolves. Leonie, however, was bewildered by Grandfell's peculiar presence. Clad in a suit and dress shoes for a rupture raid, he sipped his tea calmly amidst the flames. Her frustration was evident as she muttered, "Who the heck is that jerk?" A suggestion emerged from the blonde guy in the guild, proposing that Grandfell might be a streamer. Streamers were known to broadcast the happenings within the ruptures, and it seemed plausible given the circumstances. Leonie seemed to accept the idea, reflecting on it. and it appeared that he may have followed a different guild inside but couldn't keep up with them. In response to this, Leonie couldn't help but vent her annoyance, muttering, "Stupid jerk." Her frustration was palpable, but there was still a sliver of her humanity left. She attempted to warn Grandfell that he should not remain in this place, as it wasn't suitable for civilians. With a commanding tone, she ordered him to exit the rupture immediately. But Grandfell remained silent, looking at her with the same level of annoyance. He appeared unfazed, savoring his tea with slow, deliberate sips, closing his eyes to appreciate the flavor. Leonie's eyebrows drew closer in frustration, and she clenched her teeth tightly. Meanwhile, the other members of her guild were trying hard to stifle their laughter as they witnessed this humorous exchange. The situation had taken an unexpected and comical turn, with Grandfell's unique presence disrupting the flow of events in the midst of the fiery chaos within the rupture. As Leonie's irritation towards Grandfell grew, she was on the verge of delivering a well-deserved kick when her guild members suddenly noticed something in the distance. Their collective attention shifted in unison, and this time even Grandfell paid heed. Approaching them was a formidable force, their enemies, marching in their direction. Tension gripped the group, and they assumed defensive positions, growing more serious with every step the adversaries took. The approaching adversaries were bloodied bandits, each with a level of 230. Leonie grasped her sword, commanding her guild members to take their positions. Within a split second, they found themselves fighting for their lives. One of the guild members noticed that many of the bloodied bandits were armed, and he quickly relayed this information to the team to avoid surprises. Leonie, wielding her sword with impressive skill, swiftly dispatched multiple bloodied bandits with a single swing. As the chaos intensified, another member of the guild screamed, drawing Leonie's attention to even more bloodied bandits armed with bows and arrows. The dire situation forced Leonie to exclaim her frustration at being surrounded and implored Grandfell for guidance. Grandfell, still sipping tea and appearing utterly relaxed in his seat, seemed unfazed by the chaos. This incensed Leonie, and she couldn't comprehend why he hadn't left. She questioned his sanity, urging him to run as the situation demanded immediate action. Muttering to himself, Grandfell seemed to contemplate the situation and muttered something that caught everyone's attention. Still focused on his cup of tea, he contemplated the feasibility of escape. His calm demeanor puzzled the others, and they were forcibly brought back to reality by the menacing growls of the bloodied bandits. The bandits launched a fierce arrow assault, releasing thousands of arrows on the Berserker Guild, but something incredible happened. A blue light enveloped Grandfell as he continued to inspect the mana inside his thermos bottle. He was interfering with the mana, and the guild members watched in awe as a blinding light formed. As the light coalesced into a formidable barrier, the guild members were left utterly shocked, unsure of what they were witnessing. Leonie, her eyes wide in astonishment, couldn't contain her curiosity and asked herself, "What is it? Alchemy?" She had never seen or heard of such a skill before, and it was evident that this was something extraordinary. With a smirk on his face, Grandfell revealed the truth. "What I'm using is magic itself." His revelation left Leonie and the entire guild awestruck, for they had never encountered such a display of power before. The mystery of Grandfell's abilities and the unfolding chaos would undoubtedly redefine their understanding of the world they inhabited. And there you have it, the captivating tale of Lee Hoyeol's incredible journey in the world of Archana Continent. If you want to find out what happens next, stay tuned because we'll be continuing this story in our upcoming videos. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join us on this thrilling adventure. Until next time, folks. Thanks for watching.